Greetings, terrestrials, greetings, and welcome to Strange Times Indeed with Cliff McCallister. I, of course, am your host, Cliff McCallister, the czar of the bizarre. Every week on this show, we take your calls to hear about the strange and unexplained things in our world, but this week, we're taking a break from the things so unexplained as to be described as interdimensional or extraterrestrial. This week, we're looking at the unexplained within our own world. We are in part 3 of our 4-part bi-weekly true crime series, Who Killed Marilyn? That's right. Getting to the bottom of it, the murder of Marilyn Monroe. But before that, we've got news right off the top. Now, this first story coming to us out of LAX, I got this news report from our viewer, a friend of the show, field investigator Cullen Dolson gave me a call before the program, said, "You've got to hear this." Right over LAX, a flight coming in from China is going in to land at LAX, and what should they witness? 6,000 feet above the airport, but a mysterious jet-packed man, a man in a jetpack, flying over LAX. Now, last I checked, most people don't have jetpacks. Jetpacks are not a common thing in the year 2020. No, far be it from what the Jetsons imagined our future might look like. We do not yet have jetpacks in this time and space. And so now we've got this thing, and I've done some research into this, and it appears that this is the second time that a man with a jetpack has been sighted over LAX. We've got a comment here, Bear52. He's from the future. Could be. Are future men jetpacking over LAX? Are they warning us of something that could happen there? Now, that's not the only thing happening at airports. That's right. As you may know on this show, we have been tracking sightings of the Mothman at O'Hare International Airport, and there was just a fresh reporting coming in recently. This is coming from a government official. Get this, a 17-year veteran of the United States Postal Service. He is departing from the United Postal Service sorting facility in Chicago's O'Hare International Airport. This is happening 11 p.m. on Thursday, September 24th. Very recently, this news coming from Singular Fortean. This was the man's report. He says, "I had just left work at the USPS sorting facility at O'Hare Airport at about 11 p.m. on Thursday on the 24th of September, and was walking out to my car when I saw something standing at the far end of the parking lot where I usually park. At first, I thought it was a very tall person with a long coat. As I got closer, I unlocked my car, which caused the headlights to come on. My headlights hit the person standing about 20 to 25 feet from my car, causing it to turn and look right at me. I saw that this was not some person, but some red-eyed creature, and what appeared to be a coat were actually wings, which had spread out as it turned to look at me. At first, I thought it was some very, very large bird, but I had never seen any bird that stood almost 7 feet tall. I'm 5'4", and this thing looked taller than me by at least 2 feet. This thing then started making some type of chirping sound, almost a half chirp, half click, and then like someone was clicking their tongue, but much, much faster. It then made some type of screeching sound and took off running towards me. It got within 10 feet of me, and it took off into the air and flew above me. I was screaming hysterically as I crouched down behind the car's open doors, and I dived into my car head first. I was in a near panic as I tried to start the car, close and lock the doors, and turn on my interior lights. I started my car and took off out of the parking lot and flew down the road till I hit the main road. I got home and told my husband, who also works at the same facility, and he was the one who told me about the sightings of this thing. I was scared shitless, and I hope I never see this thing again. This thing is roaming around the area, scaring people half to death. I hope the airport people decide to do something about this thing someday. And we here at Strange Times Indeed also hope the airport people decide to do something about the Mothman sightings at O'Hare. Now, obviously, you can't mess with the Mothman. The Mothman is a harbinger, a warning of sorts, as we witnessed in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. But you can't attack this creature. But what you can do is heed the warnings and what the Chicago O'Hare International ought to do, because there's no way with all these sightings of the Mothman that there is not security footage of the Mothman at O'Hare. It's all there. They've just got to release the footage. So if you're watching tonight and you've got Twitter, go ahead, tune in, log on to Twitter, and start tweeting Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Tweet at them and demand they release the security camera footage of Mothman sightings at their airport. Now, of course, this is the other issue going along with government suppression of information when it comes to the extraterrestrial and the strange. But this, a surprising news story coming out just the other day. This is a report from Popular Mechanics. Trump acknowledges UFO. That's right. We have a sitting president acknowledging UFOs. Now, this is a very big thing for the community. This is very exciting that a president would even acknowledge that they exist. Now, we're not here praising President Trump, because here's what he goes on to say. Not only does he acknowledge them, but then he threatens aliens with military action. Now, that's Popular Mechanics terms. We prefer the term extraterrestrials on this show. But in an interview, he said when they asked if there was a UFO task force, he responded and said he was going to have to check in on that. He said, I've heard that. I heard that 2 days ago, so I'll check on that. I'll take a good, strong look at that. So he is looking at the UFO task force, but he went on to say this. He went on to talk about the military, said, I will tell you this. I'm not going to do the voice. There's only one president I'll impersonate on the show tonight or any other night, and it's John Fitzgerald Kennedy. Now, our president, he said, I will tell you this. We have now created a military, the likes of which we have never had before in terms of equipment and the equipment we have, the weapons we have, and hope to God we never have to use them. But have you created a military, the likes of which nobody has ever had? Russia, China, they're all envious of what we've had. I've built the USA, we'll rebuild it. $2.5 trillion. As far as the other question, I'll check it out. I heard about it 2 days ago, actually. But here's the thing. If the president, let me find, there's got to be the actual pull source where he threatens them with military action. But this website keeps scrolling into different news stories. Popular Mechanics. Either way, I'm sure it's in here. If our president is threatening extraterrestrials with violence, with military action, that's one step too far. These are advanced species coming to us from worlds away. We've only gotten to the moon so far. Even if we have a great military, we've only gotten to the moon. And if they've gotten all the way to us, they've got far worse than we could ever dream of. And so we cannot be tagging them first. Here's the thing. We've got a thing in the Trump says, Trump is an alien, an extraterrestrial. I'm not entirely sure that's true. An extraterrestrial would be smart enough not to threaten other ones with such violence. They are coming to this world. They have not attacked us yet. We don't have reason to believe that they should. They are just hovering in. They are observing. But if our first thing is to threaten them, we are going to be in a big mess of trouble. People worry about global warming. People worry about the world coming to a swift and violent end. If we take violent action against extraterrestrials, it is over for us, baby. That's it. That's the end of the world. There's nothing left after that. But we are not messing around here. If we have a president willing to acknowledge extraterrestrials exist, we need one who is willing and able to exercise restraint in interactions with them. Now let's get on here. Let's keep it rolling into our series, our third part of our 4-part bi-weekly series, Who Killed Marilyn? An examination into the murder of Marilyn Monroe. This is based off the book by Tony Sciacca, and every week we go chapter by chapter. We're doing 2 chapters for each part. We are currently right in the middle, part 3, chapters 5 and 6. And we are taking a close examination tonight into the murder and the resulting cover-up of the death of the murder of Marilyn Monroe. Now, this episode comes with a very pertinent and important content warning for those viewing tonight. As we discuss these two chapters of the book, there is in-depth discussions on murder, on suicide, and also the dismissal of suicide as such. So if those are things that are troubling to you, please skip this episode. Tune back in next week for our extra terrestrial paranormal show as we cover this true crime topic. If these issues are troubling to you, please feel free to skip this episode. You're not obligated to watch things that may be harmful to you. But let's get into it now. Chapter 5, we're taking a look at the murder of Marilyn Monroe. And of course, she could not have been murdered right the day of her death. She spent it happy. She spent it making plans with friends for the future. She had plans. She died a Saturday night, but she had plans the following Monday, and she made those plans on Friday and Saturday. She had many plans for that particular Monday. But let's take a specific look going back. This is right in the beginning. We'll be reading excerpts of the book as we go. This is from August 4th, 1962. A Saturday. Marilyn's last day on Earth. She doesn't know it, of course. She's still behaving precisely the reverse of how someone would behave if she were planning to close out her life. All of those who had any contact with her on that last day agree she was happy, excited, looking forward with great joy to that Saturday night and the following week. The beach date with Skolsky, the talk about Jean Harlow, changing her will on Monday, meeting the potential director of a future film that same day, flying to New York on Wednesday, meeting Jules Stein Thursday to discuss another film project, and on and on. Clearly, this is not a woman at the end of her life. This is a woman at the beginning of a new life. And yet it was cut short. It was cut short by murder. Now, she spent that day decorating her home. Even her in-home nurse, Mrs. Murray, and her press agent, they were there much of the day, but they did not see her much. And you said, well, why didn't they see Marilyn Monroe much the last day she was alive? Because she was in the second bedroom on the phone. She was calling friends all day. She was happy. She was having the time of her life. Dr. Greenson, her psychiatrist, he visited around 5 in the afternoon, and he stayed with her for nearly 2 hours. Now, here's the thing. Well, why does a psychiatrist show up on this nice day and talk to her for 2 hours? Well, something must be amiss there. But what's clearly amiss is what actually happened during those 2 hours, yes? Now, Dr. Greenson, he's been very silent about what he'd been up to during this time. He did not really engage with the media. He's been quiet. He's only said a few phrases, a few short, brief excerpts regarding that time he spent with Marilyn on the last day of her life. Now, this from the book. It says, what did go on behind Marilyn's door at that time is of vital importance because it no doubt has a bearing on the events that led to her death. But Dr. Greenson has been of no help in his few public statements. Immediately after Marilyn's death was made official by a belated call to police, Greenson told the coroner's man who came to pick up the body that Marilyn was despondent. And he said the same thing to reporters. But years later, in an interview with a medical journal that was prompted by Norman Mailer's almost gentle criticism of the psychiatrist in Marilyn, Greenson said she was getting better. She was on the road to what looked like some sort of stability. And she died. Unexpectedly, suddenly. Now, these contradictions don't quite add up. He tells the police one night that Marilyn is despondent when they find her dead of an apparent suicide, but then when he gets some brief criticism from Norman Mailer, he starts to change his story. He says, we thought she was getting better. Everything seemed to be going okay. As if he realized that he could no longer continue to cover up this murder, to play along with the lie, the official fiction, as they would call it, that Marilyn had committed suicide. Now, Dr. Greenson, at this point, he sends away, while he's there for 2 hours, Marilyn's publicist is there all day, and he sends her away. He says, you're upsetting Marilyn. We need you out of here. And she storms off. There's a bit of a huff. But just interestingly enough, and the official reports don't record this, But around the afternoon, Bobby Kennedy visits that day. Now, Marilyn had, as we learned last week on the show, she had been having an affair with Bobby Kennedy, and towards the end of her life was threatening to go public with all the details, with all the information that Bobby Kennedy had told her, and also all the things that Bobby Kennedy had done to her. That's right. That's why he's a prime suspect in this, because he had been avoiding her. He had been trying to get away from her, and she said, "If you keep giving me the cold shoulder, I'm going to go to the press, mister." And so now, who shows up the day of her death but Bobby Kennedy? Now, this is something that's not widely reported in any official documents, but we have reputable sources within the LAPD, and they confirm that there exists a police report in their vault, a 723-page report labeled Marilyn Monroe Murder. That much information about a suicide? I don't think so. This is a very complex case. And if you're wondering why the police would cover it up, well, we'll get into that later in tonight's program. But let's talk about Bobby Kennedy visiting. Now, here's the thing. Bobby Kennedy, according to sources within the Los Angeles Police Department, admitted that he visited Marilyn during the afternoon in response to her angry phone call. This is where she threatened to go public with everything they had done together and everything he had told her about politics. Well, when he got there, she attacked him, and that's what he reportedly said. He subdued her and then called a doctor for help. The doctor came over and gave Marilyn an injection to calm her down. Now, that information, never admitted publicly by anyone in an official position, is part of the reason a new investigation into Marilyn's death is demanded by Slatzer, Mailer, private detectives, and so many investigative journalists who have dug beneath the surface on this case. And we here, Strange Times Indeed, are echoing the call by Tony Sciacca in this book to open up a grand jury investigation into the murder of Marilyn Monroe. This has gone on too long. The people who killed her walk free today. And we need a grand jury to investigate this, because so many people, everyone who gave statements to the police, everyone who aided and spoke to the Suicide Investigative Task Force after the fact, has never had to answer questions under oath. And if you're watching this show, we want you to tweet the President of the United States and demand that we get a grand jury investigation into the murder of Marilyn Monroe. I think if there's any president who would pursue this at this time, it's our current president. Any other president would push this aside, but I really think now is our best chance to get a grand jury investigation into this murder. So tweet at him, start demanding it, and get the hashtag rolling. The hashtag Grand Jury Maryland. Now we go on. Bobby Kennedy shows up. He brings a doctor over after getting attacked by Marilyn in such a frantic state, and he subdues her with some kind of medicine, some kind of injection. This is where the night starts to calm down for Marilyn. Now, Bobby Kennedy's there alone. He does this. He leaves. Now, this information is corroborated, and we'll get to that later when we break down our suspect investigation later on in the show, but we're just examining the actual night of her murder right now. So Bobby Kennedy comes, Bobby Kennedy goes. Marilyn gets another phone call. Who is it? It's Joe DiMaggio Jr., the son of her best friend and former lover and husband, Joe DiMaggio. Now, Joe DiMaggio Jr. was set to be engaged. He was set to be married at the young age of 18, and Marilyn thought that was far too young. And yet, he calls her that night, the night that she commits suicide, to tell her that he's not actually getting married. He said he's called it off. He agrees. He's too young. They're gonna take their time with it. And Marilyn's elated. She's elated by this news. It's the happiest news she's heard in a long time. She even calls up Dr. Greenson, her psychiatrist. She says, "This is great. I'm so happy for them." But she would be dead the next morning of what police would tell you was a suicide. Now, this happens around 7 o'clock, the phone call with Joe DiMaggio Jr. And sometime between 7 o'clock and 8 o'clock after this phone call, she gets a call from Peter Lawford. Now, Peter Lawford is the brother-in-law of the President of the United States. And not only a close member of the Kennedy circles, but a dear friend of Marilyn Monroe. And he had invited her to come over and meet Bobby Kennedy that night. Now, this is before the official fiction kicked in that Bobby Kennedy wasn't even in or around Los Angeles at that time. That she was supposed to attend a party with him. He calls to check in on her and ask if she's coming to the party. And his recounting of this are so full of contradictions. We're going to break it down when we start talking about how we think the Kennedys were involved. We're going through the timeline right now. So he does this phone call. She declines to come to the party. She says, "I'm feeling tired. I'll stay home." And then she's discovered around midnight by Mrs. Marilyn. Now, this is where things start to get messy. You see, Mrs. Murray discovers Marilyn around midnight. But the police aren't notified until 4:25 in the morning. There's a 4-hour gap between the murder and when the police start actually looking into this. Or between the moment when her body is found, the moment when her body is discovered. There's a 4-hour gap. So what exactly happens there? And how come the official reports state that the body was discovered around 3 in the morning? Well, we're about to get into that. Here is an excerpt. This is Sergeant Clemens' testimony. Now, Sergeant Clemens, you may remember from episode 1, he was the first police officer to arrive at the scene. The first one to show up to meet with Mrs. Murray and Dr. Greenson, Dr. Engelberg, her psychiatrist, and her physician. This officer, Dr. Sergeant Clemson, he's not a doctor either. He's the first person there, the first policeman to arrive at the scene to investigate the whole thing. This is what he says, because things just don't add up. Sergeant Clemens said and maintains today that he was dazzled by some peculiar discrepancies in what he was told and what he saw. Mrs. Murray told him that she had become alarmed about Marilyn around midnight and called Dr. Greenson. Midnight! There is no doubt in his mind, Clemens says, that's what he was told. Midnight. And the doctor said they were at the scene within a half hour. He asked them why they delayed notifying police for about 4 hours. But one of the doctors gave an answer that didn't make any sense, and there was no adequate explanation for that delay. There never would be. When detectives arrived to investigate and Clemens returned to the precinct duty, the official police reports noted that doctors said they did not arrive until well after 3, and Marilyn was pronounced dead at either 3:35 or 3:50, depending on which of the two versions is consulted. So you see that there? Right there, Sergeant Clemens asks Dr. Greenson, Dr. Engelberg, Mrs. Murray, why they didn't notify police for 4 hours when they discover it at midnight. And suddenly, when the second round of officers show up, their stories changed. Something is different. There's no longer a gap. There's no longer a 4-hour gap. But after getting no satisfactory explanation for that delay, Clemens walked into the bedroom. So he asked them about the delay. And after he gets no explanation for it, Clemens walks into the bathroom and he sees Marilyn's body on the bed face down. He remembers his impression quite vividly. It appeared to me that the scene had been arranged, and if I had been the investigating detective, I would have given them a very bad time about arranging the scene, because Marilyn did not stretch out in any such fashion and die. Her legs were completely parallel, and she looked like she was a dead body that had been put into that position. When she died, she would not have been in that position. There's no possibility of a person dying of an overdose that way. In deaths from barbiturates, in the last moments before consciousness is lost, there is pain, there's contortion. It's common to find a body on the floor, very common to see the body twisted. You never see a body with the legs straight, and I've seen many hundreds of suicides by drug overdose. Somebody murdered her. Obviously, it wasn't a suicide. Anybody could see that, and that was an out-and-out case of murder. And what it finally gets right down to is the fact that she had a lethal dose of barbiturates in her bloodstream and her digestive tract was clean. When you get down to this fact, it needs explaining. Now, that's right, and there we go, another contradiction in just the physicality of the way that she died. It is said that Marilyn Monroe took nearly 50 pills, 50 Nembutols, on the night that she committed suicide. But this doesn't even add up to the evidence found at the crime scene. Now, if you look, let me find the exact page that this is under. All right, here we go. Looking at the evidence from the crime scene, they collected the pill bottles of the Nembutols. Now, in the description of what was found there, doctors and the resulting folks who did the autopsy said she must have taken nearly 50 Nembutols. She was prescribed Nembutols. She filled that prescription 2 days before she died. But in the evidence report, the bottle of Nembutols is listed as stating empty container number 20858 8-362. That's the day she filled the prescription before her death. Nembutol, 1/2 grain, numbers 25. The last symbol, number 25, means there were 25 tablets in the empty vial that Marilyn had bought on Friday, the day before her death. There's no way she could have taken nearly 50 pills if there were only 25 pills in the bottle to begin with. It simply doesn't add up. And if you look further into her autopsy report, the autopsy report of Marilyn Monroe states that inside of her stomach there was no residue found, no resulting residue of any pills. If you die of a pill overdose, there's overdose in your stomach, in your intestinal tract. If it's not in your stomach, it's in your esophagus. It's down lower, it's in your small intestine. But this doctor, according to the report that was made public, did not share the small intestine. He did not investigate the small intestine. Now let's take a look at this here. This is the autopsy report, and this is what was found. Right here in the book. As the book reads, this isn't word for word the autopsy report, but this is what the book says. There was no sign of drug and its remnants in Marilyn's stomach. The autopsy report states the stomach is almost completely empty. The content is brownish mucoid fluid. The volume is estimated to be no more than 20 cc. No residue of pills is noted. There isn't even evidence of refractile crystals of the death drug in her stomach. According to Noguchi, a smear made of the gastric contents and examined under the polarized microscope shows no refractile crystals. And that is almost an impossibility according to medical examiners I've questioned. A stranger still, what happened to the hamburger that Pat Newcomb said Marilyn ate during the early afternoon? There is no sign of remnants of any food in her stomach, which seems rather strange if Marilyn did have something to eat. According to the medical men, food ingested even many hours before swallowing a large quantities of pills would slow down the body's ability to absorb those pills and would even more certain to lock the remnants of the pills in the digestive tract. That did not happen in this case. Going to the next stage of the digestive process in duodenum, Noguchi says that the report, Noguchi was the man who performed the autopsy, he says in the report that there was no evidence of any sort of residue in the lower part of her stomach. The content of the duodenum is also examined under polarized microscope and shows no refractile crystals. And now comes the most suspect part of all. In this very strange autopsy report, Dr. Noguchi claims that he never made a chemical analysis of the small intestine to determine whether remnants of the drug she was presumed to have swallowed in her suicide were lodged in that organ. In several interviews over the years, Noguchi has insisted that no test of the small intestine was ever made. Mailer, among other writers, questioned that curious omission, and Noguchi replied in 1962, "We didn't have tests in small intestines. The facilities were not available." But if you look at the autopsy report under the small intestine, it states that it is saved for further toxicological study. And in questioning another pathologist, Dr. Sidney S. Weinberg, the Suffolk County Chief Medical Examiner, she stated that in 1962, back then, we were able to make that test. The instrumentation back then was no problem at all, a rather simple toxicological analysis. The report on the intestines says they started to examine it, and then Noguchi says they can't do it, which is a little strange. We must assume there was an examination, and it's very likely there was. You see, what kind of reasons would this man have to change, to cover up a murder, to not investigate the small intestine? Well, of course, this is a career-minded man. He wants to move further into his field of study. But he also knows that as of this time, as he is investigating the body of Marilyn Monroe, the chief of police, the morning she is discovered, declares it a suicide. It's a suicide before the autopsy has even been done. Now, this is a chief of police with big aspirations. This is a man trying to become the next head of the FBI. And as this man, this chief of police, seeks to draw the connection to become a member of the FBI, the chief of the FBI, because the Kennedys are trying to edge out J. Edgar Hoover. They're trying to get Hoover out of there. They don't like him. But they do like this police chief, and they're going to like him a lot more if he rules Marilyn Monroe's murder a suicide, because that frees them of any connection. So this medical examiner, the man performing the autopsy, thinking about his job, and this is what the book says. If you are the coroner and you know the judgment has already been rendered suicide, you might think twice about bringing the verdict of murder. You would be searching for evidence that this was a suicide. After all, if you report it as a murder and the police are bending all the evidence to say it's a suicide, and will perhaps continue to insist it was a suicide even after your murder findings, you might be made to look the fool. Your professional ability might be brought into question, and therefore it would be in your interest as coroner to find evidence of barbiturates in the small intestine. But if you examined the small intestine and found no such evidence, highly visible yellow dye from the capsules, for example, then you would be forced to conclude it was a murder. And so you might claim that the small intestine was never tested. It all grows even more curious when we consider what sources within the LAPD who refuse to permit the use of their names for obvious reasons, tell us that they have seen in the Marilyn Monroe murder file that the autopsy report that was made public is not the original report. And that is the tale of the murder of Marilyn Monroe and the ensuing cover-up. But we're going to look closer at the Kennedys, Peter Lawford, and his contradictions in his retelling of her last night alive. We'll look at our other suspects as well. Joe DiMaggio, Arthur Miller, the Wronged Wives Club, and extraterrestrials, of course. We all know Marilyn was a cosmic woman with a psychic musk. Could the extraterrestrials have done her in? We'll be looking at the evidence to our suspects when we return from the break. Stephen, let's... Oh, a question in the... Was she found in the nude? Yes. And that's what's so strange. The question from the chat before we go to break, was Marilyn Monroe found in the nude? Yes, in fact, she was. She was found completely naked, and those who know her, those who knew her sleeping routine every night before bed, Marilyn would put her phones in another room so as not to be disturbed, which makes it so suspect she was found with a phone in her hand. If she were truly going to bed to lay herself down to sleep forever, her phones would be in another room. And even still, she'd like to dress nice when she went to sleep. She did not sleep in the nude. She was a proper woman who put something on over her body. So to be found naked like that, another strange occurrence. We'll get into our suspects and more after the break. Go ahead, Stephen. We'll see you right in a couple seconds. Greetings, terrestrials. This is Cliff McCallister, host of Strange Times Indeed with Cliff McCallister on twitch.tv/MetComedyNight. Did you know the vast majority of interactions with extraterrestrials, cryptids, and interdimensional beings occur outside the home? That's why we're encouraging you to take part in the Maryland Ensemble Theater's Sweat for Met 5K, occurring October 23rd through 25th. You've got to get out of the house at some point, and it's time you look to the skies and experience something truly bizarre. A virtual 5K happening anytime, any place, between October 23rd and 25th. Register today, October 7th, and get a free t-shirt. This is the last day to get the free t-shirt, so you gotta register now. Head over to MarylandEnsemble.org for more information. And remember, we support the Maryland Ensemble Theater because they're the only theater that has the guts to put us on the air. Chill. Greetings, terrestrials. Welcome back. Welcome back to Strange Times Indeed with Cliff McCallister. I, of course, am your host, Cliff McCallister, the Czar of the Bazaar. Tonight, we are in part 3 of our 4-part bi-weekly series, Who Killed Marilyn? Looking into the murder of Marilyn Monroe. Now, of course, I've got to address the PSA you just saw. The Maryland Ensemble Theater, every show here, every episode of Strange Times Indeed is dedicated to the Maryland Ensemble Theater because they're the only theater with the guts to put us on the air. Now, they're running a 5K to support the theater right now. It's a virtual 5K, so anyone can sign up. You go to marylandensemble.org for more information about that. You can do it anytime, anywhere from October 23rd to 25th. They're also running their 4-part bi-weekly series. Oh, I wonder where they got that idea from. Victory is within our grasp, an exploration of the women's suffrage movement, real monologues from the women's suffrage movement, and of course, right here on twitch.tv/MetComedyNight, home of Strange Times Indeed with Cliff McCallister. Tune in tomorrow night at 9 o'clock for Oh Crit, the D&D improv show. They've got a spooky, scary, silly Halloween show coming up tomorrow night, 9 o'clock, right here. So be sure to tune in for that. Now, moving along with our Who Killed Marilyn series, Steven, our technical director, he has had some theories of his own regarding who killed Marilyn. I'd like to bring Steven on so we can talk about those further tonight. But Steven, your theory is very interesting.
Hello, yes.
You purport, as we learned at part 2 weeks ago, that you believe that the murderer of Marilyn Monroe was not the Kennedys, not Arthur Miller, not Joe DiMaggio, not these wronged wives, not the extraterrestrials, but you believe it to be Carol Baskin.
I have reason to suspect Carol Baskin. Everyone is suspicious of her for sicking the tigers on her husband. And as a matter of fact, I found another article that I feel like clears up and links why she might specifically be mad at Marilyn for forming with the tigers and singing a song about a tiger. And
I would like to point out, because this was pointed out last week, that at the time Marilyn Monroe was murdered, Carol Baskin would have only been 1 year old.
Right. There's a suspicious theory that I have that we could get into later as to how it got accomplished at that age, because in a linear timeline, most certainly was 1 years old. But right here, I've got an article that says Carol Baskin slams Cardi B and Meg Stallion's WAP video for filming with big cats. It glamorizes the idea of rich people having tigers as pets. Well, this gives me reason to believe as why she would be mad at Marilyn. There's so many different things in this article. One of the things being, it says specifically that the cats, in order to stand in front of a green screen, would be starved or beaten, and that doesn't add up to me because I've performed in a circus, and I've seen trained animals working with trainers, and like I could imagine on a film set, you can't ask the cameraman, the director, and other people to close their eyes and close their ears and look away as you beat your animal. I mean, everyone could see you. They're like, they know what's going on. So she claims it even though she wasn't there, right? So it's almost like she wants to hoard all the animal reactions to herself, and granted,
yes, it seems that just because an animal is involved in a show doesn't inherently mean that it's abused.
Precisely, and they weren't filmed. The actors weren't filmed with the tigers as well, so it gives the tigers plenty of time, and specifically only with their trainer and not being with another person that they're not used to or familiar with.
Right. And there's someone in the chat suggests that maybe she's a time traveler like the guy in the jetpack.
So, okay, why does Carol Baskin try to protect these animals so much. I mean, I have a firm belief that people interacting with animals educates humans about animals, and the world, people in the world aren't getting smaller; they're getting bigger, and one day, like, we might have to play a part in the conservation of every animal, right? But
Sure.
it seems to me she's so sensitive about the captivity of cats if they belong to other people because she might be in captivity herself. Is she in captivity by aliens? And were aliens able to help her time travel after she saw the WAP video in order to take her vengeance out on Maryland because she could not as easily get away with killing Cardi B, it being 2020? It's easier to cover up a murder in 1962, and her alien captives would have wanted that to happen because apparently Marilyn knew too much about aliens anyways. And they're trying to hush it up. I see you're making that strange face. Are you
What it sounds to me like, what it sounds to me is it sounds almost as if Carol Baskin has been kidnapped by these extraterrestrials, and at some point in her life was held in a zoo for them all to watch her and see what she was doing, almost like humans would for a tiger. But they have done it to Carol Baskin, and she's doing it on this other Earth. Now, she is there in this space and time, and in this moment has come completely unstuck from our own. But she's there at that zoo for all these extraterrestrials to witness. Let's call them Tralfamadorians, for lack of a better term, and they're watching her. They are watching her Carol Baskin live in this container, and then all of a sudden, meanwhile, she has to keep living her life on Earth, but she's now both in space and on Earth at the same time, and perhaps she is no longer able to distinguish where, in fact, she is in the present. She's become unstuck from time, perhaps. And thus, in witnessing the things that Marilyn Monroe had done with "Touch Me, Tiger," it's just like WAP. It's just as dirty. It sexualizes the tiger. It sexualizes the woman. Touch me, tiger.
And here's the thing. They didn't.
It's basically a WAP as it is.
It had to have been Maryland with a real tiger because they didn't have special effects where they could just Photoshop the tigers in post.
Absolutely. There's no CGI tigers in Marilyn's time. So Carol Baskin, in becoming completely unstuck, has come through to when she was 1 year old and exacted some sort of revenge on Marilyn Monroe.
Very well could be. And there's other information that I found here, and this is just this is entertaining, me at least. But the songs that Carol Baskin danced to on Dancing with the Stars was "Eye of the Tiger," "What's New Pussycat," and "Circle of Life." On "Circle of Life," she got eliminated. So they're all at-theme songs, as you would expect. Sense. But then you got eliminated on "Circle of Life." And is "Circle of Life" a clue as to the circle that she time traveled back to get her vengeance for her current?
Quite possibly, Stephen. Now that is an incredible theory. I'd love to explore that more on our final program. Is there anything else about it you'd like to inform us about tonight?
No, I will do some more investigation before the next time get into this series.
All right. Well, when we return, we're going to be getting into the evidence as to each individual suspect that we've laid out in the Who Killed Marilyn case. Steven, if we could roll a quick break, I've got to run Spangler, our own cat, our own big cat here, downstairs. He's
Looks like
grown.
Barefoot
He's
and
4.
52 thought that was an actual tiger.
It's possible. It's possible.
All
But
right.
let's roll a quick break, and
The
we will return.
animation. Is recording. Camera 1 and sound speeds. Ready for your slate. Action.
Take 3. 21 years ago, I came here with Susan B. Anthony, and we came for exactly the same purpose as that for which we are here tonight.
That so far as my right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness was concerned, others must judge for me.
I do not believe that giving the women the ballot is immediately going to cure all the ills of life. I do not believe that white women are dewdrops just exhaled from the skies. I think that, like men, they may be divided into 3 classes: the good, the bad, and the indifferent.
Go.
Welcome back, terrestrials, to Strange Times Indeed with Cliff McCallister. I, of course, your host, Cliff McCallister, as we delve into part 3 of our 4-part bi-weekly series, Who Killed Marilyn? We've broken down the murder itself. We've looked at the cover-up. Now it's time to look at our suspects that we've gathered from past episodes. Now, this first suspect, the Kennedys, the Kennedy clan as a whole, Bobby Kennedy, Jack Kennedy, they're all involved. Ted Kennedy, probably too. After all, who could forget Chappaquiddick? Now, Bobby Kennedy visited Maryland. It's not in official reports, but in the LAPD police files covering Marilyn's murder, a 700-page document kept secret from the public, mind you. This is information gathered from there regarding Bobby's deposition and his visit to Marilyn Monroe on the afternoon of her murder, of her suicide, her death. This is what the book says. But the next afternoon, her last day, according to what is said to be in Bobby's deposition, Marilyn again spoke to him and became hysterical. She threatened him with scandal once more. He told police that he drove over to Marilyn's house Saturday afternoon. She started an argument that grew so violent she attacked him, and Bobby was forced to throw her to the floor. Marilyn was screaming, "I'm tired of this whole thing of being a plaything." Marilyn complained bitterly that sometimes when she was invited to Lawford's house for dinner or a party, there would have been hookers present, and she didn't want to have anything to do with cheap hookers. How dare they invite her to a party filled with whores? Now, that last statement, Bobby Kennedy quoting Marilyn about hookers at Lawford's house, is another strange element in this case. Norman Mailer in Maryland wrote that other journalists had been told Marilyn was upset by a call from Peter Lawford inviting her to join them and Bobby and a couple of hookers. Marilyn, much offended, told Lawford to fuck off and went to bed early. It was never made clear where the reporter's information came from, but it could only have been from someone close to Lawford. It confirms to some degree that it is believed to be in police files about the Marilyn Monroe murder case. Now, Marilyn was so hysterical that Bobby Kennedy said in his deposition that he called a doctor to come over and give her a shot to calm her down. A doctor responded to the call, and Kennedy said, and gave her a shot of pentobarbital in the left arm. Then, Bobby said, he returned to Lawford's house. Lawford was having a party that night that Marilyn was invited to. She was supposed to rendezvous with Bobby Kennedy there. Now, some people say, what happened? Well, how come this story about Bobby Kennedy isn't more public? Well, the police know it, and that's about it. Quickly, Peter Lawford and those who were close to Kennedy started saying that Bobby Kennedy had been in D.C. that night. He hadn't actually been in Los Angeles. But one of Marilyn Monroe's own neighbors corroborated this story. She was playing bridge with some friends that Saturday afternoon, and they all saw Bobby pull up with a doctor. Bobby, of course, a very recognizable man. Bobby Kennedy gets out of the car, and they go, there he is. There's Bobby, off to with Marilyn. But there's a man with him who has a medical bag, a doctor, presumably, perhaps the one who gave her this shot. Now, Marilyn, when she was found, had no traces of pills in her stomach, but had a high dosage of barbiturates in her blood. And we covered how that just doesn't quite add up when we talked about the autopsy of the case. But the woman who corroborated this story, the woman who said that she saw Bobby Kennedy there, initially reported it to the press, but didn't say anything after that. She became so stressed by bearing the weight of Marilyn Monroe's murder that she died from it. And her daughter initially wouldn't even speak to the writer of this book until he promised her full anonymity. But let's look, because as we know, Marilyn was very close with Peter Lawford. Peter Lawford was very close with the Kennedys. Of course, he was Jack Kennedy's brother-in-law. But his actions the night of Marilyn Monroe's death just simply do not add up. And he spoke to reporter Earl Wilson about that night later on. Initially, he said over the phone, Marilyn was fuzzy and sleepy, but it doesn't add up. Here's what the book says. This is a sizable excerpt. I think it's good. I think it's very telling that Peter Lawford knew something was wrong that night. Earl Wilson, based on information supplied by Lawford for several tellings of this story, goes on to say the following. She answered the phone in what he remembered as a weird, sleepy, fuzzy voice. In words that were slurred, halting, and unclear, Marilyn said that she wasn't going to make it there for dinner, that she was too tired, that Pat Newcomb wasn't coming either. They'd been in a quarrel and Pat had gone home. Peter Lawford decided from her uneven voice and enunciation that Marilyn was either drunk or half asleep on sleeping pills. This was not an unusual condition for her at that time. Note, there are two things to keep in mind about this part of Lawford's story. Since Pat Newcomb had specifically been invited, Lawford must have phoned Marilyn during the afternoon. And if Lawford was so close to Marilyn, he must have known there was something strange in the fact that she had answered the telephone while half asleep, for all her friends knew that she put the phones in a small bedroom before she turned in for the night. We talked about it just before the break. Part of her nightly ritual, no phones in the bedroom, so she could not be disturbed. But what Marilyn said next, gave him the scare of his life. Goodbye, Pat. Goodbye. Say goodbye to the president and say goodbye to yourself, 'cause you're a nice guy. She had said goodbye. This wasn't an ordinary sleeping pill jag. Marilyn's voice faded away as though she dropped off to sleep and let the phone fall from her hand. When somebody says goodbye, I figure that's terminal, Peter Lawford told me later. Going into a mild panic, but concealing his concern for the guests at the party, Lawford phoned his manager, Milt Ebbins. I think I should go over there and see if she's all right, Lawford said. But with his client uppermost in his mind, Ebbins replied, You can't go over there, Peter. You're the brother-in-law to the President of the United States. Your wife's away. Anyway, you're not the one to go. That's for her doctor or analyst. Let me get in touch with her doctors or her lawyer. They can help her. Marilyn had done this before in what seemed to be an attempt to get sympathy. She had been found naked on the floor in the Calneva Lodge in Lake Tahoe with the phone off the hook. But she said goodbye to me. She may be dying, Lawford argued. That's how Lawford remembered it. No mention of Bobby. The official fiction that Bobby was back east and not in California was still being maintained, and Lawford was one of those trying to prop it up. The strangest thing of all about Lawford's story is that he claims he was persuaded not to go to Marilyn's house because of a possible scandal, because you're the brother-in-law of the President of the United States. Did Lawford accept that advice because he was afraid his wife might get upset? That he dashed over to Marilyn's house when he was certain she was dying? Does Lawford expect us to believe that his wife would be so jealous as to such an errand of mercy? Especially when he said she was so close a companion to Marilyn that he called because she might be lonely with Pat out of town? Lawford's story gets even weirder when an investigator jumps back a page or so in Wilson's book, Show Business Laid Bare, and reads the following. Peter Lawford and Patricia had a pleasant little house on the ocean in Santa Monica, where both the president and the attorney general had visited them, and where both had met Marilyn. Sometimes they said, with a laugh, that they were bearding for one or the other. The thought that occurs is that both Lawfords had been acting as beards for Marilyn's intimate dates with the Kennedys. So why the hell would Peter have worried about Pat's reaction if he ran to Marilyn's house to save her life? And in that paragraph, the Lawfords told Wilson they were bearding not only for the president, but for Bobby, the man who was left out of Lawford's account of Marilyn's last day of life. It was possible, of course, that Lawford accepted his agent's advice out of fear that if Marilyn was indeed dying and attempted suicide, his discovery of her body could lead to scandal because of his relationship to the president. But that doesn't make much sense on several levels. For one thing, everyone in Hollywood, including the reporters, knew Marilyn was very close with the Lawfords. She was with them a great deal during her last summer. In fact, at the end of June, Marilyn posed for photos by George Barris in the Lawfords' home, beside the pool and on their private beach. The photos were intended to be Marilyn at home, but because her home wasn't decorated and the area around her pool was not completely landscaped, she used the Lawfords' place for photos that were published worldwide. Why didn't it occur to Peter then that those photos could have caused a scandal? Hollywood's sex queen posing nude in the home and on the property of the president's brother-in-law? There's still another element here that makes Lawford's stance difficult to believe. Peter, of course, was a member of Sinatra's clan, and so far as most reporters knew at the time, Marilyn and Frank were having an affair. There was even talk in Hollywood that they might be married. No reporter or gossip columnist in the world would have questioned the fact that Sinatra's close friend rushed to help Sinatra's woman. Further, Lawford knew both Bobby and Jack had been intimate with Marilyn. He damn well knew because he had been a beard often enough and his house had been used for their meetings. Suppose you were the brother-in-law of the president. You knew the president and his kid brother had both been having an affair with Marilyn. You get a call from her that makes you believe she was killing herself and specifically saying goodbye to the president? Wouldn't it occur to you that perhaps she had left a suicide note mentioning the president or his brother or both? And wouldn't it occur that perhaps that suicide note would be confiscated before it should be confiscated, before it fell into the wrong hands? You'd break your ass to get over to that house. And Peter Lawford didn't do that at all. He sat behind and he waited it out. He just let it go by. Well, maybe Marilyn Monroe will die. I don't think so. Her body's discovered at midnight. There's a 4-hour gap. What was Peter Lawford hiding? Why didn't he go rescue her? Perhaps he knew that something was up, that somebody had killed Marilyn and he knew to keep out of it. All this happens. And Peter Lawford, of course, brother-in-law to the President of the United States. He's got the connections to Kennedys. If the Kennedys killed Marilyn and they knew it was going to happen that night, you bet your ass Peter Lawford knew as well. But he just let Marilyn die that night, either because he knew she was murdered or because she committed suicide. Whichever verdict you believe, Peter Lawford, undoubtedly a man responsible in her death by his own inaction. Now, looking for that, as thusly connected to the Kennedys, like we said, if they killed her, he would have known about it. And if she committed suicide, he could have done something to help her. But clearly, a prime suspect here as laid out in this book, the Kennedy families. Now, going on to our other suspects, Arthur Miller, no mentions of Arthur Miller in this chapter. Perhaps he was just that good. I mean, he was a great writer. Perhaps he could have laid low, found a subtle way to kill Marilyn. Maybe construct a plan, a plot in which she falls in love with the president to her own demise. Did he orchestrate it as if it were a play? The puppet master above it all? It's possible. We're not ruling it out. Now, Joe DiMaggio, of course, mentioned earlier, when Joe DiMaggio Jr. gives Marilyn a call, and he says, I'm not getting married, and Marilyn's ecstatic. She's happy. Well, maybe, who's to say Joe DiMaggio didn't love that girl, didn't want to see his son go off and get hitched? It's not stated in this book whether Joe DiMaggio himself agreed with Marilyn, though it is said many times that Marilyn and Joe DiMaggio were great friends, even until her last day on Earth. And looking at the photos from this book, the very last photo, a photo of Marilyn Monroe's funeral plot here, her gravestone, her tombstone, and right there, a bouquet of roses. Joe DiMaggio ordered fresh roses to be placed in a black metal vase twice a week for forever after Marilyn Monroe died. So perhaps he had nothing to do with it at all. Perhaps he was just her friend. Or maybe he was upset about how she tore his own son's relationship apart. And he set out to do this. And the flowers, it's all just a cover. Now, of course, there's the Wronged Wives Club. Any woman whose husband left her because he thought he had half a chance with Marilyn Monroe, and let's not forget the president of the Wronged Wives Club, Jackie Kennedy. Now, it's noted in page 91 of the book, right here, that Jackie Kennedy, part of the reason, let's see, here's what the book says. This is a chapter, or a part of the chapter. Bobby had told the guys handling the investigation that Marilyn was annoying Jack Kennedy. This is when he's talking to LAPD in a secret conversation on the 72-page report labeled Marilyn Monroe Murder. In his deposition to the police, Bobby told the guys handling the investigation that Marilyn was annoying Jack Kennedy, chasing him and making lots of phone calls to him. Jack was afraid of the embarrassment that she could cause him. He was also pretty upset because Jackie Kennedy was, quote, bitching and even talking about getting a divorce. That's what Bobby said. Well, if she's bitching and trying to get a divorce, who's to say she's not wrangling up the girls to take down Marilyn, keep her husband? It's a possibility. We're not ruling it out. Not yet, at least, because the book's not finished. And of course, there are no mentions to extraterrestrials in this book, in this chapter either. Previously, Marilyn is called a cosmic woman. She is said to have psychic musk, and she's even referred subtly when the book notes that Jack Kennedy was a known star fucker. And now those of us in the community know Jack Kennedy and star fuckers, those are people who are after a little extraterrestrial booty. And is it possible that Marilyn was killed by extraterrestrials, perhaps in the way that Stephen lined out? Perhaps these Tralfamadorians got to her after speaking to Carol Baskin. Perhaps she radicalized one of them to start treating humans with respect or something. I guess that doesn't make sense if they murdered her, but we're still hammering it out. We're still hammering out the Carol Baskin theory, the extraterrestrial theory. But that really about brings it to the close tonight for Who Killed Marilyn, looking at the suspects so far in chapters 5 and 6. Now, in 2 weeks, the Thursday before Halloween, we'll be closing this part for our final installment of Who Killed Marilyn. We're going to examine the last 2 chapters of this book, keep note of our suspects, and see where it takes you. If you follow me on Instagram at Strange Times Indeed, I've been reading each chapter on Instagram Live, so you can go back, listen to the book up until now. A free audio book for you. We're hedging our bets on this one. And you get your way from chapters all the way up to chapter 6. You can catch up, share your theories on the final episode. And in chapter 7 is titled Who Killed Marilyn? Chapter 8, the final chapter, was Sinatra involved? Now here we go. There's a 0-hour spin. Sinatra not on our list of suspects at the moment. Could this final chapter change everything? Who's to say you'll have to tune in 2 weeks? Strange Times Indeed with Cliff McCallister. But of course, don't skip next week's show. We're here every Thursday, 9 o'clock. Tune in next week. We're back to our traditional paranormal programming. If you've experienced anything strange, anything unexplained, anything weird, bizarre, ghosts, extraterrestrials, interdimensional beings, cryptids, give us a call. We want to hear about it on the show. You can talk to me, the Czar of the Bizarre. And of course, every week I also offer not only a place to share your experiences with the unexplained, but dream interpretations. You've got a dream you can't quite explain. I interpret them right here. Strange Times Indeed with Cliff McCallister. This show, as always, is dedicated to the Maryland Ensemble Theater, the only theater with the guts to put us on the air. Head to MarylandEnsemble.org to check out everything they're doing right now. Support the Sweat for Met 5K. The Victory is Within Our Grasp mini-series. And tune in to twitch.tv/Met Comedy Night right here tomorrow, 9 o'clock, to see Crit doing their signature special spooky Crit D&D themed improv show for Halloween. Now, of course, we do this show. This is part 3 of a 4-part bi-weekly series. It's a true crime series, and there's a certain weight to talking about true crime. You see, the lives told, the lives represented in these stories, Marilyn Monroe and, of course, her murderers, whoever they may be, well, these were real people. And real lives were affected by the stories that we tell on this show. My poor Marilyn is no longer with us, and, well, who's to say about these Kennedy chumps? But something happened, something sad, something heartbreaking. Whether you believe that Marilyn committed suicide or you follow the true belief that she was murdered, her life is no longer with us one way or another, and how can you ever truly weigh the value of a human life? But Marilyn, a truly ecstatic, cosmic woman among one of the best. And we treat her with respect here on Strange Times Indeed. We tell this story, we tell her story out of respect for her, out of respect for all those involved in her life. Any of the victims of the senseless violence associated with the death of Marilyn Monroe. We take things seriously here, and we ask that that those of you at home join us in taking a moment to truly pay homage to Marilyn, to respect her here tonight as we all respect her in our hearts. And we would like you, those of you at home, to light a candle for Marilyn, because it's time that we honored this powerful, strong woman as only we can, as we light a candle out of respect for our dear departed Marilyn Monroe. Goodbye, Norma Jean. Though we never knew you at all, it's clear you didn't kill yourself. You were so busy that last day. You made plans with your friends, and you fought with Bobby Kay. You wanted to tell the world about a presidential roll in the hay. And it seems to me a grand jury should investigate your death. Not a single soul spoke under earth when they did you in. And I know we'll solve your murder before we reach the end. This 4-part series on Strange Times Indeed. Who killed Marilyn? Being a beard is tough, and Peter Lawford said you needed help. The contradictions don't add up about the night you passed away. And even your autopsy, not a trace of drugs were found inside your intestinal tract, but they filled your bloodstream. And it seems to me a grand jury should investigate your death. You knew far too much about Bobby Kennedy and the Bay of Pigs. And I know we'll solve your murder before we reach the end. This 4-part series on strange times indeed. Who killed Marilyn? Goodbye, Norma Jean. Though we never knew you at all, it's clear you didn't kill yourself. You were so busy that last day. Goodbye, Norma Jean, a cosmic woman from outer space. Perhaps depression is more nuanced than feeling sad every single day. But it seems to me a grand jury should investigate your death. Not a single soul spoke under oath when they did you in. And I know we'll solve your murder before we reach the end. This 4-part series on strange times indeed. Who killed Marilyn? This 4-part series on strange times indeed. Who killed Marilyn? Remember, tweet the president. Get him to open a grand jury investigation into the murder of Marilyn Monroe. That's been Strange Times Indeed. Thanks to the Maryland Ensemble Theater. Thanks to our technical director, Stephen Craig. Stay strange, terrestrials.